That's the theme song to book lunches. And so we're at a book lunch today. Welcome. We're going to conclude, let you know the itinerary here. I'm kind of a one-man band here, so I have to move things around, you know. This is kind of fun, actually. You know, I sort of get this out of the way. All right. There. As I was saying, it's a little bit of a one-man band, so I have to move things around. It's not. I've only been doing this for a short time. I mean, this kind of idea, and but it brings. Before we get to Irving Singer's book and conclude our series on nature of love, I'd like to make a few extemporaneous, spontaneous comments about what I'm just doing now. So this is a little bit in the nature of life. Life can be sometimes makeshift, and as this brings to mind. In a future episode, I'm going to discuss postmodernism, and in particular, Charles Jenks, the late, great Charles Jenks, the architect. He did a lot of the best work, I feel, on the subject of postmodernism. He was an architect, and he wrote so many books on architecture. Charles Jenks was his name, and the only reason why I mention this is he wrote a book called Ad Hocism in the early 70s. And he tried to put forth this kind of very sort of fun-spirited, but also serious theory, you know, of to be an ad hoc world, ad hoc person, modular, you know, where things are kind of move around and they're makeshift. And it's a way of being in a style that is maybe appropriate for certain contexts, not all, of course. And so I've seen a little bit of that here. And this is Irving Singer, the man, here in this video. And so we're going to conclude his book, which I'm sad a little bit to leave his book behind. I'm going to miss him and miss his book. I mean, one of the interesting things about seeing these videos like this is that I only know of him outside of the classroom riding a bicycle in Harvard Square, going to the Harvard bookstore and telling me I should get John Rawls' book or I should get his book. Actually, he's telling me I should buy his book on the nature of love. And lo and behold, I did, right? How many times is it in life that any person is just going to the bookstore or a Saturday afternoon, actually it's probably a Saturday afternoon, and you run into a well-known author who says, well, have you checked this out? I wrote this. It's just part of just, you know, it's like getting a bagel or, you know, so it's actually kind of interesting to think about that. That can't be an everyday experience for everybody. Not everybody lives in a town where you have 200,000 professors or authors living around them or in the vicinity, you know. And so it was all the nature of that life and that I had for 35 plus years, 30 to 35, 40 years. And so one of those people was Irving Singer. And now we're talking about his book. But I wanted to say, talk a little bit about formal shape, or form of things. So this has a form. It's 3 episodes, and that means there's not going to be a 4th episode. So part of the meaning of what I'm doing at this very second is that there won't be a 4th and a 5th. And it's matching the shape of his text, And then I decided it's going to be 3 when I was planning this series. I said, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make it 3 books, but here's what I'm going to do for the audience, you, the viewer, listener. I'm not going to do a book. I'm not going to do an episode for each book. So it isn't going to be like number 1, number 2, and this would be, we'd only do this one because it's 3. Now, in every single episode, I'm going to be non-linear and go from book to book. I mean, not of course in a random or meaningless fashion. There's a method to the madness, right, as they say. But actually, in this episode, I am going to stick to book 3 for the most part, and I'm going to play some stuff like him talking. And so, but that's puppet. Anyhow, all that stuff I just said was how I planned this series. And if you think about it, so the music I played up front, that's a theme I wrote. And I knew in that music, it's going to be a few measures. It's going to be simple. It's going to have a shape that's very familiar. The word would be, it's actually a good word is conventional. It's a convention. It's in terms of the melodies, and it's going to be based on this. And actually one of the people who is watching the show said, I like that music. And so I said, well, it's based on such and such. It's not, it's based on a few notes of a well-known song by Rodgers and Hart called I Could Write a Book. But of course, it's not taking that song. It's just a couple of notes, and I've made my own thing. And of course, if I could write a book, this is a book launch. And so Frank Sinatra is saying, if they asked me, I could write a book. And see that also you're at the mercy of platforms. This platform decides they yank something. They don't want you to pause too long. So let's go back to.
Well, in some ways,
that's a sign we're supposed to. That's a sign we're supposed to play Mr. Singer here. Now, a couple of remarks on Singer. This is Singer towards more or less the end of his life and teaching career. So this would be about 07, 08. The good people at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, preserve these, which is remarkable. So we can watch, so we don't have to be enrolled at MIT. These students paid, these are future, that person in that Scotland t-shirt or whatever in 07 probably is now working in some lab somewhere. Or, I don't know. But my point is it's like this was preserved by MIT. And of course, part of my research was looking up as much as I could about Irving Singer. And I discovered something really interesting that was reported in his obituary, which I'll get to towards the end of the show. It's a little surprise, little personal biography of Singer, not his war heroism in World War II, and not, Jewish immigration and the Jewish diaspora and all that. And of course, that's all part of it too, part of his life and coming to Massachusetts, but something you might not expect. And so it should be interesting. So let's hear Irving Singer talk. Now, this is the last class of his Nature of Love class. And so he has his own ideas. I share some of them. I don't share all of them, of course, but I find this very interesting because he's talking about the arts. So
time goes on, my thinking changes. I get new ideas. And second, because I don't believe that there is any single big idea about the nature of love that I am willing to espouse as.
All right. Sorry. He says, I don't think there is any single big idea about the nature of love. He's a pluralist. That's pluralism in a nutshell. I'm a pluralist, so I like that. That means that there's plural ways to love.
my philosophy. That's a view that comes from the rationalist tradition, in which life is thought to be a problem, and it's the job of the philosopher to deal with that problem at its deepest levels. I don't think life is a problem, and in terms of a deep level, that varies a great deal with circumstances and with the individual. If somebody is dying of cancer, it's a deep problem to get the right medication, to find something that will keep him alive or her alive, which will vary from period to period. And the more difficult questions about the meaning of life or what the meaning of death is will not have the same kind of immediate importance. So it's very hard to know just what's meant by the deeper problems that philosophers are supposed to deal with. In any event, if you mean by that traditional problems about the origin of being, the nature of being, I don't find those problems very interesting. For me, the question is the Socratic one: how to live, how to make sense of one's life, how to recognize the fact that there isn't any single solution because different people from different points of view have a different meaning in their lives and make sense in different ways. So that my kind of philosopher is more empirical, less rationalistic, more pluralistic in the sense that he or she doesn't expect to find a single answer, and more investigatory. Also, in my particular case, the investigation proceeds on the nature of my own talents, which is mainly as an aesthetician, somebody who is sensitive to the immediacy of life, particularly as represented by works of art. So for me, philosophy becomes a work of art.
So he just used a word related to our podcast. He says, I am an esthetician. So not only is he a philosopher, one of his fields of study is aesthetics. He's actually technically an esthetician. I thought that was interesting to hear him say that.
Expressing one's own point of view, but in ways that will be meaningful to other people and that will vary from stage to stage of one's artistic development. As you all know about great artists, they're never the same at the end as they are at the beginning. It's not that they've gone any further, it's just that they've developed in that direction, or if they weren't in that direction, it wouldn't be at the end. And some people will say, oh, what a pity, his great period was his middle period, and others will say, oh no, it's his last period. Think of the music of Beethoven. The last quartets are considered to be the greatest quartets ever written, and also a level of profundity that Beethoven had never reached before. So much so that they're said to be more spiritual. Well, in some way they are more spiritual in a traditional way, but I think of them being more spiritual in my sense of the word spirit, which is that spirit is that part of nature which belongs to us as human beings aspiring to get beyond nature, aspiring to satisfy values and ideals that are very important to us as human beings. Where do those values and ideals come from? Not beyond nature, but rather from within our nature in the pluralistic way that I keep talking about, of each of us trying to make sense of the world in a way that will matter to us, and if we're lucky, will matter to other people. I see that in Beethoven, ascribing all that to the religion he held, which is very unclear. He wrote traditional religious music, and some of it the church can accept as being authentic. But in his own feelings, what I find more representative is the sense of humanity that he expresses in his one opera, and a great opera, one of the greatest operas, but the only one he wrote, called Fidelio, which is all about political prisoners being liberated. It could have been written during the Second World War, and the tyrants being overcome because of married love. Florestan is a political prisoner in a dungeon, and his wife, Leonora, transvestites, dressed herself up as a boy in order to get a job in the jail, and finally she succeeded in finding him, Florestan, and liberating him from the jail keeper who was a tyrant who was about to murder him.
So I'm going to cut out there, even though that's a really, if you folks don't know Fidelio, Beethoven, good stuff, of course, but he went into, everything has a, with a professor like Singer, everything has a meaning. It's not always only random. I mean, there is of necessity contingency in everything we all do. There's contingency in his course plan, but everything connects. He says, well, I'm a pluralist. This is what I feel. There's many ways to love. And here's Beethoven. And people agree that Beethoven's quartets are amazing, but we don't know. He says, we don't know a lot about what Beethoven felt. But what Beethoven did feel, he thankfully for all of perpetuity and us, and he put it into his music. And so I thought that was really, and I'm turning this off here because I don't want to be, when I'm talking and doing tech stuff, I don't want to have pictures and things kind of getting in the way too much. Again, I'm a one-man band. I'm trying to do everything here. So I'm going to, since this is the end, and I want to say a few comments about endings. As part of the structure of this particular series, that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, which is a really, in a lot of respects, in our current moment, is an underrated way to do things. By which I mean it's people are interested in things other than that. People are interested in things that are open-ended and all that and don't have endings. But it's a good way to do things. Not the only way, but it's underrated in our particular moment. And so I thought it'd be nice to do 3 books, 3 episodes. When we get to Hannah Arendt, which is going to be our next book, and when I do my aesthetic series, that very much is more open-ended, and it's by design that it be open-ended. And so it's kind of a little bit like a piece of music. You have 6 minutes, you have 13 minutes, and and endings can and should maybe perhaps make us sad, but they can also make us satisfied, because you want to go on to other things, and you want to conclude in that nature of life. You don't want to do the same thing all day, right? And so it's part of we'll create an order to the universe here. But anyway, I thought I would open this up. Now, his last chapter is called Toward a Modern Theory of Love. Now, going towards something is interesting. Like if I say I'm going toward across the room, right? I'm going to go over here. There's different ways of looking at that. Something as banal as that, right? I mean, you could say that, well, you could say, don't even discuss it, just go over there. That's a school of thought, right? But there's different attitudes you could take to it. You could sort of take the idea, I'm gonna go walk to the shutters over there to see what the weather's like. So today it's 8 degrees right now. I think it's hovering around 8 and 12 here where I live, and the sun came out, and that sun may melt the ice, it may not, I don't know. And that's the conditions here. And so everything's frozen. And I just got a text from a driver, a person who does transportation, said that they were snowed in because of a tree. And so they weren't able to meet me to go get a grocery or something. It's just these things in my life, living in very radically different conditions that are different, that is, from an urban city with enormous amount of people doing things like desalting roads and all that. And so that's not really here, right? So winter and certain kinds of weather means a different thing here than it would in Boston, Cambridge, Detroit, right? Anyhow, so if I'm going to go over to the window, I could say, well, I'm going to go toward the window, right? he's going to go towards a theory of love. This is where he doesn't want to have closure. Really dislike that word, but I thought I would use it because it is in fashion. It's still, I think, a vogue word. And Brian Gunner's word, but he we're going to have we're going to say, this is what love is, a definition. Here's my definition. He doesn't do it. He says toward. Let's see. And so the last chapter of his book is an inventory, of all these things. And they're things from the 70s and the 80s. They're not things from the 90s and 2000s because of when it was written. So you won't find, for example, Kate Mann in this book, right? Or you won't find, I don't know, Caitlin Flanagan in this book. You won't find contemporary pontificators and whatever, right? You won't. But you will find Shulamith Firestone in The Dialectic of Sex. So you might find one of my all-time favorite books on sexuality, Donald Simon's The Evolution of Human Sexuality? Amazing book. I have a first edition over there, bring out at some point. Anyhow, you might find that, or you might find, stuff like that because of periodization, because he's in a period. And this is the latest book that's getting reviewed, in 1982. And it's a book by Margaret Mead, or a book by Clifford Geertz about a Samoan people and what they do. And they do this and they eat this kind of food and they make this way, not another way. And so that's kind of this book comes from that. But I feel that this book, even though his examples are dated in the sense that they're rooted in what was being published at the moment, let's see if it's still relevant. Let's see, right? I think it is. The chapter before his last chapter is called Scientific Intimations. And so this is the survey I was talking about. So John Bowlby, the attachment guy, right? Mentions him. Harlow, I'm just trying, Melanie Klein. So actually, I'm going to read a passage here that gets a little technical. And I want to, before I read, I'm going to mention something about who some of these folks are. Now, I've read all this stuff. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I know, I wish, look, I can't help it. I've read Karen Horney and Melanie Klein. I could do a seminar now on the differences between Melanie Klein and Karen Horney, two very famous psychoanalysts. Don't worry. Won't do that here, but I could. But he just mentioning these two people, right? And so it's kind of because they wrote about, and that's just in the realm of Freudian, just the Freudian field. And I pretty much, this gets even more interesting because I've read Melanie Klein and Karen Horney, but I don't agree with them because in part I don't really agree very much with Freud. I think I mentioned in an earlier episode that I really love his Civilization is Discontents is the greatest essay book ever written. So you could say, well, Mitch, how can you disagree with somebody but praise so highly that text? Because that text is amazing. Is amazing. There's nothing else written in that year as good as that. But it has mistakes in it. It has blind spots. It has, assumptions, prejudices, all of its author. And so the interesting thing is they sort of try to get past that or around that or beyond or above that and get to what's good in Freud's text, what's beautiful or what's interesting, right? Or what's stimulating, right? Or because that's the nature of value, right? At least in terms of this context, where we look for what is positive or valuable, even in things that at the end of the day, we can't fully sign on with, right? So, and that's that subtlety that I wanted. So anyhow, it's just one example. Klein, should I do the Klein? I don't know. Here we go. This is a typical passage. The dialectical tensions between hate and love, guilt and reparation continue throughout an individual's development. but their operation alters as new situations occur and new faculties become available. Melanie Klein sees the capacity for identification with another person as crucial in the formation of love that is both, these are her quotes, real and strong, unquote. Using words that are reminiscent of Ficino and Kant, when they talk about reciprocal love, Klein remarks, quote, since in being identified with other people, we share, as it were, the help or satisfaction afforded to them by ourselves, we gain in one way what we have sacrificed in another. In order to act lovingly towards others, Klein states, we must first put ourselves in their place. This happens through identification, and that makes sense psychologically because it gives us a means of restoring to ourselves the benefits we have accorded those with whom we identify. We then play the part of the good parent that we always desired when we were children, as well as the part of the good child that we originally hoped to be ourselves. Okay. See what we got. Like most psychiatric theorists, Melanie Klein associates the capacity for mature love with the ability to emancipate oneself from infantile dependence. So that's just a little taste of Sainer talking about Melanie Klein. As it so happens, 25 years ago, I briefly dated a Kleinian psychoanalyst. She was from Brazil. And so we would have, you know, we weren't just romantic couple. We also had these very intense intellectual conversations about Klein, you know, and she used to tease me a little bit because she sensed I was, you know, I wasn't really a Kleinian, you know, I was into, she said, Mitch, you're into all that weird stuff. You like Jacques Lacan and those French people, and you're into that weird stuff. She used to say to me, I like my Klein. So, you know, it's kind of funny. One of the interesting things about that passage I just read is that he's dealing with a psychoanalyst and psychoanalytic theorist. But when you're dealing with folks like that, whatever else we might say about them, good, bad, indifferent, agree, disagree, whatever, it's still part of the humanities. So there's a sense in which Klein is talking about dependence and empathy and putting yourself in other people's shoes. She's in the same territory as movies, books, TV, novelists. So even though it's under a chapter called labeled scientific, it's still humane and humanist. It's part of kind of all this stuff, the music, it's totally related. There are other cats, however, and he sort of criticizes them a little bit in this book, who are totally laboratory science, and that's all they are. Or they're reductionist, or they're kind of he gets into some of that. So it's interesting to contrast that with the Melanie Klein. Where are we here? Here's a passage. Falling in love is volcanic. That's Sainer, okay? It is a phenomenon of great emotional stress. It may easily approach a state of obsessional fixation upon another person, often causing disruption in one's prior system of values. It is a common occurrence in adolescence because that is a time not only of erotic awakening, but also evaluational questioning. So he's saying there are very obvious things, right, about sort of periods of life, time, you know, stages of life, right, say adolescence. And falling in love is volcanic. He's choosing very familiar language because he's writing this book for you and us. He's writing this book for people. It's not, you know, it's very important to him when he wrote these 3 volumes to be accessible and to communicate in clear language. And that's not to say that there aren't difficult things. Klein is difficult, and he talks about, difficult issues and matters. By difficult, I don't mean a negative emotional difficulty. I mean possibly sometimes hard to comprehend kind of difficulty, right? But he always, that's his what he's doing. I'm just trying to find one of these, sort of him talking about one of the scientists, because it's funny. All right. Here we go. The theories articulated by Lawrence, that's Conrad Lawrence, one of the Darwin theorists, Eve Istfeld, as well as those of Harlow and John Bowlby, occur within the framework of Darwinian approaches to social bonding. The same applies to recent social biologists such as Edward O. Wilson and Robert Trivers. In their thinking about altruism, these two confront what seems to be a paradox in evolutionary doctrine. Most scientists assume that natural selection occurs through the development of behavior that enables an organism to survive long enough to reproduce. But in the process of performing self-sacrificial acts, which exist in many social species, individuals put themselves at a reproductive disadvantage and sometimes lose their lives. How then can this behavior be explained by these Darwinists? And so that's a common question. I mean, only if you're in that field. I'm not in that field. I mean, I've read this stuff, but I'm not a card carrying any of this stuff. Believe me, if I'm anything, I'm an aesthete. I'm like this guy here. I'm interested in Beethoven's late quartets more, shall we say. But it is interesting, and of course a lot of it altruism, he talks about dealing with acts that unite individuals who are biologically related to each other, family, the altruism of maternal altruism and all these things. And he says here, social biology is still a young science, and we should not prejudge its future capacity to yield fruitful insights about love. So at the outset, we must recognize how loosely the term romantic love has been used in many recent books. When contemporary critics vilify romantic love, treating it as a fraud or emotional disease, the object of their attack is generally conditioned that many romantics would have found quite remote from anything they wish to recommend. So he's saying that there's a confusion, that there's a slew of books that came out in 1982, I guess, that were more of, shall we say, the realist / cynical mode. And I don't mean good cynicism like Diogenes, like the ancient philosophic cynics. I mean cynical in a as a negative characteristic of people, the way it's used today by commonly, right? I'm like, don't be cynical. That they're really attacking something. They're attacking something that was not, you could say, well, that's not what I'm Shelley. I did not intend that. When I'm writing in 1870 and I'm Shelley, or if I'm Fichte and these different, these thinkers, I did that book on the Germans, the Romantic Rebels book, I think last year. A lot of those kind of folks, Schiller, when those folks were writing, they would say, well, we don't really mean what you mean by romance or love. We mean something different. We mean something that is solid, that is good, don't, this is a common thing. And it very much connects to the theme of our very podcast, because I'm actually writing a blog post now about how, there's so many examples. So I was once having dinner with a film director. I'm not going to mention any names here, film director, and a really good film director. Really good, like great, I want to say. Like made a film I thought was terrific. And this dude basically disparaged every film that I liked that came out that year. Disparaged all of them. He's like, oh, I don't like that. And what I really learned, and that was the roots of this podcast, because I was trying to understand, well, this person's really intelligent. They made a great film, but they don't like anybody else, any of these other things. And so what the temporary provisional, I guess that's a conclusion. What I came up with is that it's the question of plurality and diversity. This film director wanted to see certain things in a movie. And that means he doesn't want to see those other things in a movie. I want a movie to be X, Y. I want a movie to be this. Let's say the examples are so many. It's just the same way with like literature, a book. I could pick a book. So give you a sneak preview of the Hannah Arendt. So pick up the Hannah Arendt. Where are we here? She opens up The Life of the Mind, 1972. She's about to pass in a year or so. This is her last. But she the first thing Hannah Arendt does as an author is she disarms everybody and everything. And she interjects a little humility. So she says, the title I have given to this lecture series, The Life of the Mind, sounds pretentious. And to talk about thinking seems to me so presumptuous that I feel I should start less with an apology than with a justification. An interesting way to start. What disturbs me is that I try my hand at it, for I have neither claim nor ambition to be a philosopher or be numbered among what Kant, not without irony, called professional thinkers. See, so there's like double irony, triple. Isn't funny? So she's saying, the question then is, should I not have left these problems in the hands of the experts? So she says, I'm not an expert, but then she went on to condemn the experts or invoke a philosopher who was critical of merely career or professional philosophers. It's a little bit pejorative. So she's saying on the one hand, I'm not so expert or so good as to be a philosopher, but then goes to say, well, who wants to be right? If it's those folks over there, I don't want to association with them. But this is a common theme in Hannah Arendt. She over and over again said, not in an evaluative sense, but in a taxonomic descriptive sense, I am not a philosopher. So then the question becomes, well, what was she? Was she a political philosopher, which is distinct from philosophy, and on and on? And so this gets into a realm of, in her case, she's very careful about language, and she's a German American, and so she's thinking both in German and in English at one at the same time, because she was so brilliant that way. She actually fought in both, and her mind was certainly better than my mind and a lot of folks. But one of the things I want to talk about is she opens up her book. This sounds pretentious. So she's already anticipating, don't worry, I called this Life of the Mind, but it's not going to be that kind of book. Life of the Mind that you might really hate. This, bear with me. This might be a good life of the mind. It might be an unpretentious life of the mind. So that's just an example, of a next book I'm going to do, but to kind of relate back to Singer. Singer surveys all these people, right? Singer, this might irritate people about Singer. I can imagine somebody who's wants to get at the truth, and saying, come on, Irv, What do you go on? So let me play somebody who doesn't. So being in love may not endure. It could be a temporary union, like falling in love, that disappears when the difficulties of living together become insurmountable. The mere passage of time cannot change being in love into staying in love. Though sexual demands moderate as people get older, emotional maturity does not assure the ability to stay in love. So he's saying you could be mature and intelligent, and that won't be sufficient for you to actually stay in love. He's saying that that's maybe even that. It's not. It might not be enough, right? Interesting. On the contrary, the aging process often leads to separation, a search for love elsewhere, or even a feeling that interpersonal love is futile. Now, I should say he's writing this as a guy who lived with the same woman for like 50, 60 years. So he's, in a way, he's not talking about himself, which is interesting. So it's like interesting. This author's like leaving himself behind and saying, well, things could have gone south for me. He's imagining this, which is interesting, right? So to me, to even do that in a text is a sign of to me, a better writer, actually. Because he's saying, I'm going to leave myself aside. I'm this 60-year-old man living in I don't know where he lived in Massachusetts, Cambridge, Mass, with the same woman, he's a grandfather. In this series, he says, I've become a grandfather for the first time. He talks about in this video, and how he talks about how beautiful it is and how it changes his perspective. Really, I wish I could play all of this, but it's a lot there. Any event, he's saying it might not work out. But I can imagine an interlocutor who's not so sympathetic to saying, hey, Irv, I want to know how to love properly. Tell me. That would be a very different kind of book. I mean, I purposely chose these books precisely because they are not those kinds of books. And yet, this kind of very, what I call a survey the landscape approach, Melanie Klein, Robert Trivers, amazing Darwinian, Robert Trivers' work on, I'm confusing which scientists work with the Black Panthers. One of the Darwinian wasn't Trivers. Trivers' work was cooperation. Anyhow, that's a long, again, these, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, scientists were interesting people. They would collaborate with Eldridge Cleaver on a paper or something. I don't know. These things did happen. Interesting sort of political and science all mixed together. I didn't mean to go on a tangent, but I'm just thinking. When you read a text like this Singer book, I submit that you actually just might get more advice and clear, direct advice than in many texts that are written by best-selling psychologists to improve your life. And the reason why I say that, why I submit that as a working hypothesis, is that I've read these 3 books, and he discusses Proust and Shakespeare in great detail, and it's quite possible that Proust and Shakespeare and Beethoven or whatever else you want to talk about might really help you, actually, if read thoroughly, comprehensively, and with utmost curiosity and sensitivity and subtlety and nuance. With those things in the forefront, you experience those folks like Proust and Shakespeare, et cetera, it might be even better than the book that tells you what love is, flat out. And in a way, in these 3 volumes, he does tell you what loves are. He says these are different kinds of love. And he goes into great detail. I can't get into all this now. Partly because I don't have the energy for it, because of the weather. Partly, I don't know. Because as sad as I am to see this book go, I'm getting ready for Hannah Arendt, our next author. I'm excited about that. And partly because I want to play a clip from this movie. Right? And I have to gear up for that. I have to get that ready. So that's the nature of love. And this is the modern world we've been talking about with all the scientists and the psychoanalysts. Want to see what the last thing he writes in his book? Let's see what it is. Last paragraph. See? Bertrand Russell said, "The good life is one inspired by love and guided by knowledge. What the world needs now is not only love, but also greater knowledge about the nature of love in all of its complexity." I like that. So that's Singer's. So I thought I said I would say something about Irving Singer's personal life, and I have to look here up this obituary. Here we go. Good stuff. Irving Singer, MIT professor who wrote The Nature of Love, dies at 89, February 15th. So Irving Singer died on Valentine's Day. I'm just let's sit with that for a little bit. It says here February 15th. 2015, not so long ago. You know why he wrote this book? There's only one reason, and the obituary, wonderful Sam Roberts says here. You ready for this? Stunned by family members urging him to be more affectionate, Irving Singer, a philosophy professor, spent years researching and writing a 1,300-page, 3-volume examination of the subject titled The Nature of Love. Irving Singer, this is a quote from Singer himself, "This, like so many philosophical works, began as an attempt to understand my own inadequacies." He told the New York Times in 1987. "Everyone in my family persuaded me that I ought to be more loving, which troubled me. So like most philosophers, I dealt with the criticism by constructing a theory and a philosophy which enabled me to dismiss their ideas." Unquote. 65 years, he taught 55 years. Amazing, right? I thought you would like that little. By the way, Singer wrote in bed, and he had a system set up kind of a little bit like how Marcel Proust wrote in bed. I think his wife would, I guess, read passages to him of some ideas she had, and he would correct the text, and interesting. I only know the guy on a bicycle. So again, people have different facets. They may be in bed, they may be on a bicycle, going to the bookstore. These are all the different things. So I thought that would be interesting to see a February 15th obituary for Irving Singer, right? And his Nature of Love. So let me cue up this clip from a movie. And again, it's not what do we got here? Stuff. So dealing with the world, dealing with platforms. Says Mitch. What do we got? All right, stuff. Here we go. Wendy and Lucy. Should I pause it? I know. All right. This is an older movie from Kelly Reichardt, director, writer. This is one of her favorite actors, Michelle Williams. And again, I'm not going to tell you the whole story, even though it's quite simple. But this is about love between human and animal, this film. It's about other things as well. It's not only about that. It's about economic injustice and about poverty too. But it's also about love between her and this animal. And this is not the exact end of the film, but this is when she's reunited because she had been, because of her own travails and economic hardship, was separated from.
Come on, don't be mad.
And I want to make sure. Yeah, she hasn't seen her dog in many days, and she's been searching for her dog. And this is kind of here we go.
Hey, Lou. Hey. Hey, Lou. Do you miss me? Huh? Do you miss me? Huh? You miss me? Huh? Come here, Lou. Come here. Do you miss me? I'm sorry. Come here. Huh? I know. Come on, Lou. Don't be mad. Here. I got you something. Look at that. Huh? Go get it. Good girl. You're such a good catcher, huh? Drop it. You're such a good dog. Go get it, Lou. Go get that stick. Good dog. You're the best catcher. Drop it, Lou. Lou, give me that stick. Give me that stick, Lou. Give me that stick. Drop it. Good dog. Good girl. Huh? So nice here, Lou. That man seems so nice.
So,
Got a nice yard. Sorry, Lou.
that's of course a difficult moment. This is all fair use. I mean, this is a clip from a film, and this is all educational. It's 1976 Copyright Act. I'm trying to do this from memory of for criticism and commentary and education and edification, nothing financial. And so I thought I would play this. Partly, I mean, so this is an interesting thing. So this person is reunited with her loved one, her dog. And that's the film director. That's Kelly Reichardt's dog, by the way, at that time. And so, you know, this camera, the scene goes on, and you see she's throwing this stick to this dog, playing catch, but then you see a change come over her when it's, you know, sort of very difficult realizations play out in the actor's face. Camera stays on her face, and you see this thing. That's what a work of art is. That's what a work of art does, is present things like that to the world. Her situation as a character presents it to the world. her relationship with that dog to the world. It's released into the world, displayed in theaters or on televisions, right? And we have to deal with that in some way. You know. I mean, you might say, well, that's like me, or I'm glad I'm not in that situation, or any hundreds of things that we could feel. And, you know, it could be something like this, or it could be abstract music. Abstract sound rather than literal people or in a field or a dog. Or it could be words on a page like this book. Or the Hannah Arendt we're going to do starting in February. Or it could be discovery that every singer's obituary was on the February 15th and he passed, you know, then, right? Or that, you know, his wife thought he should have been more touchy-feely and affectionate. And that's why he wrote this. I just can't get over that. I just think that's funny in a way. It's just a different way of being in the world that he had, you know. It just wasn't a way that, you know, his family was like, come on. It's interesting, right? Well, I hope you have a good rest of the Saturday. I look forward to Mark Anthony Mendez's episode, which will come out in February. Right now, we're have the Lawn 70s podcast guys, Alex and Matt, if you tune into them. That's quite a doozy. I'm very, very happy with that episode. And I'm going to do some pop-ups and some surprises and all sorts of things coming up. So I hope you have a decent weekend, a great weekend, and be safe. And don't let this inclement weather, if it is inclement where you are, keep you locked in the house for too long or wherever you are. But thank you, and I look forward to coming back and with some more books and more music. All right.